Let's get to the story of the day. I'm sending you two versions. The first one is from an interview. The second is a story I started writing a few years later. It's not finished and has some gaps, but it tells the story's main points. The first version. I was at home, folding laundry, and didn't feel very good. When my bronchial tube started to tighten, I knew I was in trouble. I tried to use my usual inhaler, but it didn't work. My last option was to use an EpiPen, which was a shot of epinephrine, a hormone that is sometimes called adrenaline. This was something I'd never done before. That didn't work either, so I called my dad, who lived a few blocks away, and told him I needed to go to the hospital. I remember walking around my apartment like a caged animal before he got there. When he got there, I made him go outside with me while we waited for a friend to pick us up. I remember taking the first 5 steps down to the car, and that was it. I fell down in the middle of the street. Since it was a warm September evening, people were outside and saw me go down. Someone called 911 while people ran to get me out of the intersection. I had someone dragged my father out into the middle of the street. When the paramedics came, they worked on me in the street for almost 45 minutes. Since I was dead weight, they didn't move me until they could put a stretcher under me when they got there. From what I was told, they looked for signs of drug use, took blood for a quick test, and then put a tube down my throat right away. I was breathing all over the place, and my pupils were stuck together. When they thought I was stable enough to move, they put me in the ambulance. The first time my heart stopped was then. We'd only driven up to where my street turned. My dad was with the driver so he could hear the monitors go off. The driver then cursed, turned on the sirens, and said, "We're losing her." I never saw my father again. 2 more times while I was in the emergency room, my heart briefly stopped. The last time, when I think my spirit joined my body, I got up from the table and punched the nurse in the face all at once. 4 of the team members had to drag me to the table and give me a shot to calm me down. They thought I was going for the tube that goes into the mouth. What happened to me during that time is hard to explain because it was like a dream, a beautiful dream I'd never had before. I don't know where it starts. I did move through a velvety black tunnel, a kind of black I'd never seen before and can't even describe, to get to a tiny point of light far away. I felt very safe and protected. It was a very reassuring feeling. I felt love that was not conditional, joy, and a deep sense of peace. I didn't understand how time went in a straight line, and I still have trouble sometimes working within the rules of time. I was told everything that has ever happened or will ever happen. I was told why the words was, is, and will be. For example, I was told that part of the reason for global changes in the weather is that the planet is starting to return to its original shape, which is the opposite of what people thought. For example, rivers are reclaiming their beds. I remember asking those beings why this happens and why that has happened, and I learned that this is meant to be. On the other hand, I was told that people have free will and that some things happen because of choices. I remember thinking a lot about what causes what and what goes with what. Some of it I didn't like, and even though it's hard for me to understand, I know it's because of decisions. This had to do with good and bad. I heard sounds I'd never heard before, and even though I didn't see a person, I knew there were vibrations all around me that were helping and guiding me. So as I went along, I stopped all of a sudden. I didn't want to be in my body anymore. I saw what I knew to be God, and He told me it was time to go back. I started arguing with God in my own annoying way, and God told me I had to go back because I wasn't done with my job here. I think that's when I got violent in the emergency room and tried to get off the table. Up until that point, there were no neurological signs and I had not responded to neurological stimuli, pinpricks, etc. I opened my eyes, and as the room got brighter, I could feel the joy of my trip coming out of my back. As I became more aware, it seemed less and less like the truth. My family rushed me as they gathered around. I couldn't talk, which was bad, and I also couldn't move because I was being held down. I didn't know why, but I did get them to untie my hands so I could write. I had to show there was no lack of oxygen and no brain damage, so when the nurse came in, I held up a piece of paper with my name, birth date, address, social security number, work phone number, parents' names, nieces and nephews, etc. on it. She wouldn't stop asking questions even after I told her to leave the room. It's true. At that point, a doctor came in because she thought I was getting violent again. She tried to give me another shot, but I told her I was fine. She left. When I asked my sister why I was tied up, she told me. I was amused. I guess it goes without saying that I was very sad that the brightness of the other side went away so quickly after I woke up. After my family moved away, I had a dream about a James Dean-looking uncle who died in the 1960s riding by on a motorcycle and telling me, "Kid, it just wasn't your time." I called the International Association for Near-Death Studies, IANDS, in Seattle a few weeks later to find out what had happened and if it was real. The person on the other end of the line listened carefully, and when I was done, they were very upset. I asked him what my mission was, since that was the real reason I'd been called. He told me to hang up the phone, relax, and ask the universe what my job was. I have to say that I thought this was silly, but I did what he told me to do. I called him back and told him I got the weirdest answer, which was that I hadn't loved enough. I asked what on earth that could mean. I haven't killed anyone. I've always believed in God and all that, and I wouldn't even kill a fly. I'm just an ordinary woman who doesn't set the world on fire. I live day to day and do what I need to do. I think he stopped me when I had talked long enough and told me, "Congratulations, you've had a classic near-death experience." He told me that most people are sent back because they have a mission and that not loving enough could mean a million different things. I have to figure that out on my own. But he told me a secret. Part of that mission would be to let people know that death is nothing to be afraid of and that the transition is a glorious one. I would be in situations where the subject came up with people I didn't know and it never felt weird. My current view of heaven and the afterlife is that you decide what happens to you when you die. You can choose to live in a state of unconditional love or you can choose not to. It all depends on how you forgive yourself for the mistakes you've made. You feel the pain you caused in your life, and since you caused it, it all comes back to you. People sometimes go through this during their NDE, which is a review of their past lives, but I didn't. Since then, I've met a lot of people, some strange and some not. I've met angels and run into people who've helped me along my path. I've also had problems with electromagnetic fields, shorted out appliances, popped light bulbs, and been through 3 cars, one of which was brand new but turned out to be a lemon, had visions of disasters involving weather, transportation, etc., had more lucid dreams, and become more physically aware. There have been too many repercussions to list them all. And the way I think about my NDE is always changing. I might see something on TV that reminds me of another NDE. I was told that not all of the NDE would come true and that it would happen when I needed it. I can't think of anything else that could have been more amazing. I'm no longer in a hurry to get to the next moment. Instead, I live in the moment I'm in. I try not to let bad things happen to me, but since I live in the real world, it's usually easier said than done. But how I deal with these things has changed, and that's where the big change in me has happened. I'm not as quick to judge people as I used to be, and I don't try to change how they see things to match mine. I know that by making their choice, they're living out their karma, whether I think it would be good or bad for them. I know they have to go through it to learn whatever lessons they need to, and to go even further if they choose to learn from it. The second version. I've been saying for years that I'll do this. Even though I meant well, it's not an easy thing to have to go through again. It's easy to tell the story, but when the words look back at you and you can feel the emotion behind them, it's a little overwhelming. The number of times I turned on the computer. I even started it on a disk somewhere, but I never finished it. I would just stare and go back in time, feeling the floodgates open, and in the quiet of the written word, reconnect with my little piece of heaven. It really began before the event itself. It was the summer of 1994, and I hadn't felt quite right for a while. It had been a hard year for me as I tried to get my finances back on track after losing my first job. In and of itself, that whole thing was a nightmare, but I learned a lot from it. There's no way that the grass is greener on the other side. So now that I knew what not to do, I got the temporary job with my old boss. I made some good connections in the human resources department, and when the temporary job was over, it only took me a few weeks to get what seemed like the perfect job at the time. I remember starting when I was probably about to get pneumonia and didn't have much money or health insurance. I was also proud that I couldn't ask for help. I was able to get better, but for the next year or so, I always felt like I was getting a cold. I had become something of a workaholic, which is not a good trait for a secretary to have. But I had to find something to do. I had a lot of friends. I was a part of one of the cool groups at the club, so we went out and danced a lot. There had to be something missing. I didn't know what that something was. I always failed, so I thought I must not have been doing something right. After doing a program in holistic studies a few years ago, I thought I was one of the world's misfits because I couldn't find my place. Everyone else seemed to be involved in something and making good progress. Not me. I just kept reading and looking, but I couldn't find anything. I muddled along. One summer afternoon at work, I felt like I couldn't breathe and was about to pass out. I was able to call another office, but the nurse I wanted to talk to was already in a meeting. I put down the phone and the way I felt went away. I brushed it off as something crazy, like a brief case of sick building syndrome. I thought that the lack of fresh air and my sensitivity to smells probably made me sick. The weekend of Labor Day in 1994 was my first clue that something was wrong. I was having trouble breathing at the annual block party that my family has. I've had asthma my whole life, so I've always used inhalers. So I kept puffing. As the day went on and got hotter, I started to feel tired. I was able to put on a good face, and as the night went on, I was able to give up and go home. At this point, I was having trouble breathing, so I decided to call my doctor when I got back to work. I'd done this before, so I figured I was probably tired, had allergies, and might have a cold from the end of the summer. The weeks went by without a hitch. When I went to the doctor, I was fine, so the event was just something that happens at the end of summer. On September 20, I went to work like any other day. I was a little tired, and I told myself it was because of the long walk I took the night before. I was really good at finding fault. It was a lovely warm Tuesday night, and I was getting ready to do what I always do on Tuesday nights. I would get my laundry ready to take to my sister's, hang out with my nieces and baby nephew, and meet the gang at the club for a line dancing night. I wouldn't do my dance gig at all. I went to my sister's house and played with her kids and did my laundry. I even went for a walk with Maggie, their dog. During this time, my chest started to hurt, so I took out my trusted inhaler. It helped a little, but not much, so I decided not to go to the smoky club. Even though it wasn't very busy, there were a few chain smokers who kept the cloud of smoke in the air. When I got home, I started taking apart my laundry. I really started to tense up as I folded towels and sheets. I took a pill and used the inhaler a few more times, then waited for it to work. As time went on, I felt worse and worse. I called my doctor's office to let them know I was having problems and would be getting help at the emergency room. I asked him in a message if he was going to call with orders. Then I called my dad and asked him to have his friend drive me downtown. I started to feel worse and panicked as I waited for him to walk the few blocks. A few months ago, my doctor gave me an EpiPen just in case I ever had a serious problem. I was pacing like a lion in a cage. I decided to give myself the shot. I became more upset and paced around even more. At this point, my dad had arrived, so I insisted that we wait outside. It was around 8:35 at night. I grabbed his arm and we started down the first set of stairs. When we got to the landing, I could no longer see out of the side of my eyes. I was, however, gasping for air and talking the whole time. My dad told me the rest of the story about the place. As we went down the second set of steps, I still held on to him. He said that when we got to the sidewalk, I started mumbling and pulled him into the middle of the street. At this point, there was nothing but darkness around me, and I thought I was running on energy I had stored up. He said that I pulled him into the street and stood my ground. He couldn't pull me back to the pavement where it was safe. He felt my body go limp all of a sudden, and I passed out in the street as he caught me. He tried to pull me away from danger, but I was too heavy. Some of the neighbors were sitting on their patios because it was a warm evening. They saw what was going on and called 911. When I yelled for help, some of them came down to help my dad get me out of the way. I didn't move. He told me I was coughing up air and my eyes were rolling around, so he kept my head off the street. At this point, my muscles were limp and heavy, and my body had shut down. I had gotten rid of everything in my body. I had problems. At this point, people had already started to gather. A fire truck was the first to get there. On the street, the firemen helped me breathe. When the paramedics got there, they did a blood test to see if drugs were involved, and they started life support. Calls were made to the hospital to let them know we were on our way. But it took me more than 40 minutes to get me stable enough to be moved, let alone put me on a stretcher and into the truck. In the meantime, my doctor kept calling my house, worried that I hadn't made it to the hospital in town. Due to the fact that I was in a bad way, the paramedics would take me to a Catholic hospital just a few miles from my house. That night, I met a lot of angels. Some of them looked like people, and they stayed with me until help came. No one saw them arrive or leave. Never once did I see their faces, but they convinced me to stay. My journey starts now. I was floating along in a black tunnel. I didn't know where I was going because I didn't have a body, but I did notice that it was as black as I'd never seen before. It was filled with love, joy, and peace, and it helped me grow. Waves just rolled over me and led me along gently. I couldn't believe how much love was around me and that I could give it back. Someone came along at some point and showed me around the universe. I knew how the universe was made and how the galaxies were made. I got to go to places that were so advanced that I couldn't even understand them. I also got to see places that were just getting started. I was met with so much love and kindness that I cared about what was going on with my human transporter. The paramedics kept working on me and getting me ready to be taken to the hospital, but I was too busy playing on a star and meeting my creator. It never scared me that there were no bodies because I didn't know how to be afraid. Things were taken in right away, and in that instant, all knowledge was taken in. They were neither men nor women. I don't know how long this went on because there's no way to tell. I was shown and told things I couldn't have thought of. Every time the beings were done with me, I'd go back to the tunnel and float along, only to run into more beings. At some point, I saw a point of bright light. I bobbed my way toward it. All of a sudden, a large gray-colored being stood in my way. I couldn't go above, below, or through it. I remember that I tried and tried, but nothing worked. In the end, I asked it to let me through. It politely said no. I asked again. It again said no. On the earth plane, it was being a little stubborn, so I told it to move and tried to push it out of the way. No luck. I called it God, and it told me I had to go back to finish my mission. Doctors and nurses were working hard on me back on Earth. My vital signs were dangerously low, and they didn't know how much oxygen I'd lost or if my brain had been hurt. Since my pupils were fixed and they couldn't get me to respond, the doctor went into the room where my parents and sister were to tell them he didn't know how much longer I would live. He then left them alone to talk about funeral arrangements. At the same time, I reached the end of my amazing journey and my spirit came back to my body. At that moment, I got off the table and hit a nurse so hard that they thought I broke her jaw or gave her a concussion. I can't even think about how strong I was back then. When my spirit came back into my body, they thought I was trying to pull the tube out of my throat. My medical doctor says that this happened at 1:05 in the morning. I didn't know where I was, what day it was, or what time it was when I woke up. People from my family, some of my friends, my boss, and the doctors and nurses were all around me. When I woke up, I could feel that the knowledge I'd been given was being covered up. Even though I knew it was there, I couldn't get to it. To say the least, my family was in stitches. I tried to reach out to them, but I couldn't because I was being violent. My sister told me what had happened when I hit the nurse, and I couldn't help but laugh out loud. Also, I didn't know how small I was at the time. I thought I filled the room. I felt like I was on air. We talked using my sign language, and I let them know I was okay. Soon after that, a nurse came in to see if I had brain damage by asking me some questions. I grabbed the pen and paper and wrote down the answers to her question before she asked them, like my name, address, and social security number. I even wrote down my computer password at work. My boss saw that I was okay and told the nurse in a nice way to leave me alone because I was fine. At the time, my boss was an oncologist who did surgery. She asked again and again, so I started writing nursery rhymes. She left then. The doctor kept coming in and out of the room to check on me. They couldn't believe I was still alive, let alone that my brain wasn't hurt. I finally got my family to leave, telling them I was fine. I hit a nurse, and when she came to see me, she had an ice pack on her face. Even though I had hurt her, she was pretty happy. She said that this is how people act when they came back to their bodies. I began to wonder what had happened at this point. Many of my dead relatives came to see me that night to tell me everything was going to be okay. Over the next few weeks, I remembered that I was here on a mission, but I didn't know what it was. I went to a bookstore, stood in front of the New Age section, and asked for a book that would help me understand what I had been through. Right away, an NDE book by Barbara Harris jumped off the shelf and landed on my feet. So my journey starts. I found out later that my mission was to come back and love so that people wouldn't be afraid of death. You haven't loved enough, someone told me. This happened because a wonderful member of the Seattle FOI, or Friends of IANDS support group, gave me advice over the phone. He told me to ask the universe what my job was, and I already told you what I heard. I thought that was really cool. I haven't stopped since then. Most days, it's not easy to carry this miracle and wish to be home. But I know that I and everyone else are here for a reason. And sometimes, the pains of people are too much to bear. So much more needs to be said.